look, I'm telling you right now that to put forth the idea that Diana was an innocent and that Charles destroyed her innocence with his affair with Camilla is to be so wildly out of touch with reality that you don't even deserve to write a book. Diana had her own guilt, okay? And Charles had his own guilt. But the cherry on top of this paragraph for me is the fact that he would say, everyone already knows that King Charles might have preferred a life as Queen Camilla's tampon. People say crazy things when they think no one's listening, but nobody thought that this was him really revealing some kind of kink. Okay, and so for him to put that forth the way that he just did completely destroys him as having any credibility whatsoever. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to be doing a book that I never thought I would read to you because it's such a load of garbage. But I began this channel by reading you a load of garbage when I picked up Spare, and this book has all the markers of the same quality, which means it's gonna be hilarious. This book is Endgame, written by Omid Scobie, and we all know that guy has a terrible reputation when it comes to journalism. His book Finding Freedom was such a laughingstock that, though I wouldn't say he really had much to hang his hat on as far as his reputation went, although he goes to great lengths to argue otherwise in the prologue of this book, it really was the nail in the coffin for him as far as how much anybody in those inner circles would trust him. So it's a bad look. It was a bad look for him. It's almost as though he just really wanted to kill his career when he decided to write Endgame. And he's so dramatic, and he really thinks that he's bringing you a real thing. Like, he thinks he's like unveiling the reality of the, as he would call it, dry rot that is set in. What? Nothing he says in this book, according to all the reviews, now I haven't finished the book, so maybe I will change my tune. But all the reviews said he's not saying anything new. Like, these are not new things that he's bringing forward. It may be that the monarchy sinks in this new Carolinian era, now that we've passed from the Elizabethan era. But it won't be this book that does it. The prologue alone, and you guys, I almost skipped the prologue because I was like, well, I don't want to prolong this. It's just like, let's just get through it. And so I read chapter 1. It was okay. And I thought, well, maybe I should read the prologue. Like, maybe it'll give me a better idea of what he's trying to accomplish in this book. I am so glad I went back and did that. That prologue is bananas. Much like the prologue to Spare was. Remember how crazy that prologue was? I mean, remember how Harry was talking about how his mother was like a shooting star and that he could not articulate his love for his mother, so he just talked about stars raining down sparkles. Well, this prologue is not in that same vein of crazy, but it is in the vein of crazy of this Joker has a couple of lines, a couple of narratives that he is going to really try to reiterate. He hates Charles. He hates William. And he has such a tender spot in his heart for Harry. And, I mean, just reading the prologue alone, it's like, oh man, if you were trying to come across as a open and honest journalist, you shot yourself in the foot, 2 guns in both feet. Because I don't know what he's trying to accomplish here as far as creating a world in which any of us could believe him, because he's so biased. Out the gate, he's biased. He's just reiterating all of these, Charles was the worst and Diana was this poor fragile being who never had a sin in her heart. She was as pure as the Virgin Mary, and then she was sinned against by this crazy man who wanted to be a tampon. Literally, that is what he is saying in this prologue. Okay, so let's just get into it. I would love, in my fantasy world, we're going to be able to do the prologue and chapter 1. But you guys know I can talk. I don't want to skim this prologue like I had initially intended to do, because it is a gold mine, and it's really going to set the stage for us. Before we get into it, I do want to say that I really knew nothing about Omid Scobie myself. Everything I knew about him I had taken from other people's opinion of him. Tom Bauer thinks very little of him, and so does everybody else. Everybody just knows that he's just this sort of secretary for Harry and Meghan and basically pushes their story and agenda. He would say otherwise. But I decided, I was like, okay, let me go and hear what this man has to say about himself. How does he communicate? Is he an honest, forthright person? Is this really what he believes? Or is he just the sort of person that everything comes out of their mouth as a spin? He is the latter. He cannot be expected to tell the truth. And I saw this within 5 minutes of an interview. So when this book came out, I think it was around Christmas time of last year, I saw him on some program. It wasn't Good Morning Britain, or maybe it was. I don't know. I don't keep track. But it was a morning show. And he's sitting there on the couch. And, just as a side note, this man has had a completely different face slapped onto his body. All right. I don't care what that man says. He's tried to say, I never had any plastic surgery. I just age really well. It must just be my genetics. I have had a little Botox here or there, but nothing crazy. My man, you is a liar. He's like the biggest liar ever. The face you're about to see is as one of an AI robot. I don't know if it's because we're more used to seeing women with Botox, so maybe we've become numb to what that actually looks like the loss of expression in the eyes. So maybe it's just that I'm more used to that in women, but I have never seen somebody who had so much Botox in their face that nothing but their mouth could move. His eyes don't even seem to be able to blink without him really having to concentrate on, now I am blinking my eyes. It's crazy. I mean, his face looks transplanted onto him. It is not the face of a human being. He most certainly has had plastic surgery, okay? Because this is what he looked like originally, okay? This is back when he used to work for this magazine called Heat, some kind of publication called Heat. I know nothing of it. And now, this is what he looks like now. Now, do not tell me that person has not had some plastic surgery. And ain't no Botox did that, okay? Does Botox give you a new jaw? All right, so already he's a liar. The other thing he's lied about is his own age, okay? He has tried to pass himself off as 6 years younger for years. Finally, recently, he came out and was like, okay, you guys, sorry, I guess it was naive and stupid of me to be able to lie to you guys that I was, a little younger, but I didn't think anybody would ever find out or care. Okay, but see, that's the way he does all his journalism. I didn't think anybody would find out or care. Okay, well, we do care, and we are finding out. So, in this interview that I watched of him, he's sitting there on the couch looking like a deer in the headlights, may I say. Now, I don't know if that's the Botox or if that's because he knows he's a liar and he's about to get caught, because the host of this, the woman is like way less pointed in her questions to him. But the male host is not here to have any of this. And right out the gate, we get some real lies from him. Like, he is such a spin machine, but he's not good at it. And that's the other problem. Many journalists are out here lying to us day and night, but this guy is telling us lies, and it's very evident that he is because he's so bad at it. Oh, the other thing too is, another side note. He continually refers to Catherine as Kate, which I know that is what people called her before she was married to William. And even for a long time, and as Americans too, I think that we have a tendency to refer to her as Kate. That's what we're used to calling her. And I've been corrected about it many times. So I now say Catherine, because apparently it's more respectful of her station in life. And I'm willing to do that. And I really like her. So I'll do anything. But he continually refers to her as Kate, which feels purposely disrespectful. I don't know if he's trying to show that he's close enough to her to call her by her nickname, or if he just doesn't care enough to correct himself. I feel like that's more the thing. I don't know that he's going out of his way to be disrespectful, although I wouldn't be surprised if he was, because he is so disdainful of the upper echelons of the royal family. But they're talking about Catherine, and he says, I never said anything mean about her, and I just can't believe that people are trying to say that I said something mean about her in my book, Endgame. And the host is like, actually, you did, though, because you said that she was a Stepford wife. That's insulting. And Omid Scobie's like, no. I did not. I said she was Stepford wife-like. Stepford wife-like is not the same thing. And, what I really meant was that she's very regal. But so, like, for the rest of the world doesn't act like that. So they might misinterpret it as being a Stepford wife-ish. And that's what I meant. Well, that's not what you said. And calling somebody a Stepford wife and then trying to spin it and be like, that's a positive. Nobody reads it that way. So already I'm like, oh, this guy's a liar. He everything that's coming out of his mouth is not a true statement. His whole face is not a true statement. And now his mouth is also lying. The one part of his body he can get to move. And it goes on. So he says, I don't even have anything to do with Harry and Meghan. We're not like good friends or anything. I don't even know them. I've never sat with them and had a conversation with them. It's just that when I see racism, I have to stand up about it. I care about social justice, And he says, when I saw the racism of the monarchy, I had to do something about it. And when I saw the way the institution was treating Meghan, I had to stand up for that. So people can misinterpret it and say that I have some kind of special relationship with them. I don't. But I'm not going to let racism be a part of the conversation and then everyone glosses over it. Okay. Not but 2 minutes later in the interview, he says, I don't even talk about racism. This book doesn't even say that. I talk about unconscious bias, but I would never use the R word. I don't talk about racism. You literally just did. You literally just told us that you have made your mark on this story because you were willing to stand up and talk about racism. Yet 2 minutes into the interview, you can't even remember that you said that. Now you're like, I don't know why people always connect me to that. I don't even talk about racism. I talk about unconscious bias. You literally just did. So, I mean, like, he can't even keep his stories straight. So with that in mind, we're going to open up Endgame and we're going to read the prologue. And like I've said, I almost didn't do the prologue because I thought to myself, who even cares? Let's not prolong this fool's message. But the prologue is so juicy and so full of stupidity that it cannot be missed. And then, chapter 1 is mostly just him setting the stage of how everything's going to fall apart now because the queen has died and she was the only thing holding this together. Well, now that she's gone, what do we have left? Right? So we're not going to talk about that chapter as much in detail, just simply because he didn't have a lot to say that was all that new. He likes to interject himself into the story of the queen's death in a really annoying way. So we'll talk about that. But basically, he's just setting the stage in chapter 1 for now what. But this prologue is where we're going to park and sit for a while because it's insane. It's insane that he thinks that he has anything to say about anything because he's just such a I wouldn't say a poor writer necessarily. He's so devoid of any original ideas that it's shocking to me that he thought this book was going to be the definitive book on the matter. Because he is, like I said earlier, just regurgitating such old ideas, such old tropes. The evil villain husband who came down on his poor innocent wife, Diana. It's like, and it's that level of journalism that we're getting. So you guys sit back because this book is a hot mess. But we're going to enjoy it together. All right, so the prologue. It begins with him really trying to, like I said, inject himself into the story of the death of Queen Elizabeth. And he says that for months and months and months, he had to morbidly travel with a black suit lest she drop dead. That way he'd be prepared. And I guess I just feel like, was anybody going to run to him at the moment of her death and be like, Omid Scobie, what do you think about it? Maybe I really am unversed in how important he is in royal circles as to his opinion about the royal family, but I cannot imagine that at the death of the queen, anybody wanted his opinion. So for him to try to include himself in the bevy of journalists who maybe really did have to travel with a black suit is so annoying to me. I'm sure he heard that some people were, so he decided to act like, yeah, me too. And maybe he truly did travel with a black suit, thinking that he was actually that important. But if he did, that is pathetic. And the other thing, too, is he didn't even get to wear his treasured black suit because he wasn't prepared at the moment that she did die. His suit was, like, way away from him. He didn't have it with him. Which, of course, like, what do you walk to work every day with your little bag? I don't know. But he had to run next door and buy a black sweater from a store. So we begin the story with stories of himself, which is a bad look. But he says that he had been getting texts all day that the moment was near, and then when it finally was, he was put on the air. I didn't bother to go look and see if that's true, but really, that was the best they could do at the moment of crisis to slap Omid Scobie on the screen. He says 15 minutes after hearing that she had indeed passed away, he sat in front of a camera. He says, I put on my earpiece and mic. My calm in the storm, the network's royal producer, Zoe Maggie, called across the newsroom. We've had confirmation. Messages started pouring into my phone within seconds. The statement from the palace had yet to land, but my heart was already thumping. Though I had been at briefings that described what would happen the moment London Bridge, that's the code name for the monarch's death and the operation that kicked into action straight afterward, went down, nothing could truly have prepared anyone for the news. Not even the 200-page research Bible McGee had created in the recent months. The death of Britain's longest reigning monarch, a woman much loved and revered around the world, had a bigger impact on me in the moment than I expected. Basically, it's a big deal because, the Queen's dead, but mostly the nation's grandma had just died. Is that all you think of her as? Not that there's anything wrong with the power of a grandmother. A grandmother can be an essential matriarch of a family that really pushes forth the morals and mores of a specific family. So I'm not demeaning the role of grandmother, but I just think that I'm bothered by this need to humanize her constantly by people who are of lesser intellect. Meghan does it all the time. It's Harry's grandma. It's the grandma. It's the nation's grandma. You guys, she is, yes, that is an important role in the familial hierarchy. She's also the longest reigning monarch, a queen that reigned for 70 years in the modern age and did it splendidly. I mean, I just feel like, why do we need to humanize her? Why do we need that? Especially at the moment of her death, because I just feel like this isn't the time to simplify her contributions. He breaks off talking about her death to talk about why this is such a necessary book. He says, an astounding amount of royal history happened during the writing of Endgame. The world was introduced to King Charles III and Queen Camilla. Prince Andrew was stripped of his titles. Prince Harry released an explosive memoir and a revealing Netflix series. We've seen it. It's not all that revealing. And of course, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed away. He says the royal establishment has now assiduously installed an elderly new king while fending off unyielding accusations and misgivings from an exiled prince. Exiled? Exiled nothing. Okay. In order to be exiled, the government has to expel you. To meander off into the sunset with your wife and questionable 2 children is not the same thing as being exiled. So already we're getting some misleading language. Scobie continues and says, I started this book in the summer of 2022, so the Queen's passing happened well into the writing process, which means, of course, he had to go back and refigure all these past chapters, which makes me think, why did you have to do that? Because if you were telling the truth, what needs to be refigured now that she's died? But he says he had to because he needed to look at the whole thing through the twin prisms of the late monarch's death and the ascension of her eldest son. Overnight, we were in it, the royal family's new chapter, a moment I couldn't have imagined during my first royal engagement with Prince William and a then Kate Middleton over 11 years earlier. The months following the Queen's death gave me the necessary time to process such a seismic event and an opportunity to peer into the new era before contextualizing it. I don't know what that means. All right. Well, he says that the full reality of Queen Elizabeth II's death hit him 10 days later when he was joining a small group of journalists to observe the scene of the former monarch lying in state at Westminster Hall. I'm annoyed that Omid Scobie got to jump the line so that he could go and see her and be part of this press corps. Like, who is this person that he's been receiving access at all? Anyway, he says that as he stared at the coffin, lying next to the pillowed crown were the orb and scepter. Then he goes into a long paragraph in which I feel that he probably claps himself on the back for. But he's saying a lot of things where he could have said the same thing much more concisely, and a better writer could have. I'm not saying that there isn't some truth to what he's saying. I'm just saying it's evident he likes the sound of his own voice. He said, I'd seen the orb and scepter in person many times. But being so close to the 2 symbols in this setting gave me goosebumps. There was the weight of history and tradition, yes, but also the aura of mystery and myth. Ordinary things in and of themselves, really, but an acrement of time. The narratives of power and divine lineage, dictated over centuries, and the human desire for meaning and order, all alchemized, transmuting those things into powerful ideas. Okay. It was a strange, commanding magic that I felt that day in Westminster, but the woman, the human form of all that regal authority and mysterious poetry, was lying in a coffin underneath. For so long she stood for the crown and the crown for her. Without her presence, these ornaments and symbols seem exposed, naked somehow, as if they had been caught unawares. Basically, what he's trying to say through all that mumbo-jumbo is that the Queen was a regal individual who stood for all this mystery and might, but that her sad sack son is going to wreck all of that because we know too much. He says, King Charles III, even after all this time, it still doesn't always look quite right on the page. The same can be said of Queen Camilla, whose promises of her taking on only the title of Princess Consort and then Queen Consort were just white lies that the palace is now keen for people to forget. So, if you ever believed any of that nonsense, that's on you. But here we are. Despite their flaws and many mistakes, it's difficult not to sympathize with the new king and queen. Filling such enormous shoes is almost an impossible task, especially considering that when Her Majesty died, unfortunately, so did much of the legend, mystique, and secrecy that enshrouded the monarchy. It's safe to say that very few outside a strict inner circle knew much of anything about Queen Elizabeth II. She inhabited her stately role completely. Her personal life was her own, and she fiercely guarded it, knowing full well that to share it was to lose it. She also appreciated and respected the demands of the crown, service over personal gain, and duty over individual happiness. In public, her resolute composure expressed this in spades, no explanations necessary. As a side note, I think that it's important to say that she was also raised in a completely different atmosphere. Queen or no, she's not part of this social media generation where we feel like we have to describe to you which kind of toilet paper we like and which one felt too rough for me. Like, everybody just is over-explaining and over-telling. We live in an era now where people are literally setting up their phones to cry to make TikTok videos. So that you're supposed to feel sorry for these losers who had the time to set up their camera and then start crying. I mean, if that doesn't tell you the degeneracy of society, I'm not sure what will. So we have that on one end of the spectrum, and then we have Queen Elizabeth on the other, who knew that she didn't need to share everything with you. Right? Like, it's not necessarily so much that she was holding it all back and you never were going to know and it was some kind of big plan. Although I'm not saying that there wasn't some of that, but I'm just saying that I also believe she came from a generation who knew that there's no reason for you to know everything about her. We overshare all the time. We know way too much about people that are strangers to us, right? The people who needed to know about her knew about her. Her inner circle, her family, they knew. Those are the people who are supposed to know about you. Scobie wants to spend an inordinate amount of pages doubling down on how much he really does not like Charles. And this paragraph blew my socks off. He goes, with Charles and Camilla, it's the opposite. The king has lived a full life out in the public as an outspoken environmental activist, an occasional peddler in politics, a successful businessman, a flawed father, and a philandering husband who destroyed the life of Princess Diana. Destroyed it, by the way. She had no contributions whatsoever. She was an innocent lamb brought to the slaughter. Charles says that his legacy is one that he is eager to put behind him now that he's on the throne. He's known to us warts and all. His litany of personal failings and missteps is front-page fodder, and much of the British public will never fully forgive him for his role in Diana's tragic demise. I think we're coming to terms with it. And Queen Camilla, a woman who is finally tolerated by the public, but is still not universally accepted, remains to many as the other woman, the third person in Charles and Diana's marriage, and someone who caused much pain and chaos within the royal family. Now, no veil of arcane secrecy falls between the new king and queen and their subjects, providing cover and inscrutable power. Everyone already knows that King Charles might have preferred a life as Queen Camilla's tampon. What are you talking about? That's such a misinterpretation of the phone call between Charles and Camilla. You guys, look, I have never been one who's going to sit back and be like, yeah, what Charles and Camilla were up to was 100% A-okay with me. You know, that was trashy. That was trashy to be cheating on your wife, right? It was also trashy of Diana to be cheating on Charles. Both of them were not acting the way people who are in a union should act. I know, I've heard it 1,000 times. Well, you know, the aristocrats, they act differently. Their marriages don't mean the same thing as they mean for you plebes. But look, I'm telling you right now that to put forth the idea that Diana was an innocent and that Charles destroyed her innocence with his affair with Camilla is to be so wildly out of touch with reality that you don't even deserve to write a book. Diana had her own guilt, okay? And Charles had his own guilt. But the cherry on top of this paragraph for me is the fact that he would say, everyone already knows that King Charles might have preferred a life as Queen Camilla's tampon. That jokey, silly, ridiculous conversation, which was never him actually, like, that was not like some real dirty talk where he was, like, actually revealing something. They were just, like, they were being super silly and lame and just, like, you know, people say crazy things when they think no one's listening, but nobody thought that this was him really revealing some kind of kink. Okay? And so for him to put that forth the way that he just did completely destroys him as having any credibility whatsoever. Nuance is not even a word this joker knows. Okay, now, he continues to want to go on to you because he just needs you to know Charles is super unpopular, so don't even begin to think that anyone actually likes him or ever will. He says, though off to a steady start, the ongoing efforts to boost Charles' popularity will never come easy for the institution of the monarchy, regardless of his new station. As prepared for throndom as he may have felt behind palace walls, and in the minds of the public, the question remains, is he up for the job? Immediately after the Queen passed away and ordinary citizens were still shedding tears, the new King Charles made headlines after cameras caught him throwing a tantrum over a faulty pen. A stubborn eccentric who has spent most of his life waiting and planning for his ascension, even at the cost of his relationships with his own sons. The former Prince of Wales is not only far less popular than his predecessor and his successor, he has also been a thorn in the side of the institution. Despite the fact that he's well liked by world leaders and global power figures during the life of his mother, he's never fully embraced by power brokers within the system, the palace operators and partisans with links to the British establishment, including the government. When he was Prince of Wales, some senior Buckingham Palace aides had expressed to me, and others, that they felt the then next in line didn't quite have the moxie or vision for the family's next chapter. Perhaps they were right. Just weeks before becoming the new monarch, he was knee-deep in controversy involving bags of money, cash for honors allegations, and a police investigation into donations accepted by his Prince's Foundation charity. So, this guy's been a loser from day one, and he will continue to be. Don't get it twisted. He is a mess. And, it's really sad his mom died, but we've just been given the dregs. Okay. But the problem for Omid Scobie is that he's just so attached to an ideology that he will never be able to explain this story to any credibility. For example, being the person that he is, he can't disown Charles because Charles has said a couple of things that were positive about the environment and wanting to take care of the planet. Well, Omid Scobie can't ever be seen to be saying anything against climate and climate care. So if he throws Prince Charles under the bus completely like he so wants to do, then that's going to mean that he doesn't care about the planet. So he's got to come hobbling over with being like, well, I think that part was really good, you guys. It's just the rest of him that sucks. The tampon part especially. He says that maybe the real reason Charles is such a failure now is that he just really hasn't ever been able to demonstrate his readiness. Scobie says many in the firm's old guard, including the Queen's most senior courtiers, those shadowy men who Diana used to call the men in grey, I've got to evoke her name again, distrusted and disliked Charles. So, wait a second. Why is it that Diana hated these men in grey so much if they simultaneously hated Charles, who she also hated? Wouldn't that have made them her compatriots? They could all hate Charles together. So why is it that these shadowy men, quote-unquote, in grey, as Diana famously called them, were such a thorn in her side, if she could have used them to mount a defense against Charles? Regardless, Scobie wants you to know that he's always admired Charles' efforts in the environmental space. But the sad thing is that this man, who for over 55 years has been working in that space for the environment, really hasn't accomplished anything. And it would seem that he just has a real failure in helping people to capture the imagination and interest. And the people in the monarchist bubble are interested in him only because he has power, but everybody else thinks that he's just a big dud. His quirks and entitled behavior have at times alienated him from the institutional hidden forces that could change that popularity overnight, leaving him to take matters into his own hands, often with disastrous results. His failure to initiate a substantive dialogue with Prince Harry, despite how clearly his son detailed their fracture in interviews and public statements, is yet another sign of his inability to effectively address family members head-on or navigate constitutional changes. You should know that this person, no one likes him. Even the people around him who could change things for him haven't. And, on top of all that, he's just a terrible dad. Poor Harry's been crying and crying, and his dad doesn't even care. Not even kind of. And the thing is that nobody even wants him to be king. Everybody just wants William. He should have just stepped aside and let his son. Because he's just kind of like a fill-in until William can finally take the throne like he should. Scobie says to add insult to injury, Charles knows his reign will be a transitional one, an intervening sovereignty that must happen before his elder son William, the Prince of Wales, takes over at a far younger age and attempts to breathe new life into a desiccated monarchical system. Over the years, I've watched as, behind the scenes, senior courtiers and other establishment figures groom Prince William for the throne. As a long-serving member of the Queen's most trusted staff put it to me before the monarch's death, Charles may be the next king, but William is the future. Okay, I just want to say this real quick, because Scobie is super annoying because he is leaning so far in one direction, and there's no nuance or fairness to this display. But I do want to say that I'm not saying that I don't see some truth to what he's saying. Obviously, the allure to Queen Elizabeth was that she was very regal and that she looked at her position as a sacred one, and she held herself accordingly. She wasn't letting everybody into every little thought that she's ever had. She was very careful about the media, and she never over-explained anything that had happened. She was very careful about whatever it is that the institution put out. And it doesn't look like she ever played these media games, which seems like it was something of the younger generation. But it does seem like every member of the younger generation has played games with the media. I'm not as sure with William and Catherine, but there's plenty of instances of Charles and Camilla and Harry and Meghan all playing games with the media. I think that there are a lot more people who are excited about the now Prince and Princess of Wales, who would really love to see them on the throne. But that doesn't mean that we are unwilling to let Charles have his time as well. So, yes, I see what he's saying, but I also think that he is explaining this in a way that is way too one-sided. His inability to critique and to criticize Diana, or even to bring her in at all, she doesn't actually have to be brought into the conversation. I suppose you could bring her into the conversation, but if you're going to talk about her, you can't just use her as a bludgeoning tool against Charles, because that's not fair. That's not really what happened. They both played a part in the demise of that marriage. So to say, well, we can't ever trust this guy, let's look at the way he was as a husband, so, he's going to be a terrible king. That's not really fair. Diana's not here for us to continue to talk about her legacy. Everybody doesn't want to speak ill of the dead. And so she's received pass after pass after pass for her behavior, simply because she left 2 young children when she died, and that does create an aura of sympathy for everyone. But she played a hand in why things didn't go well, yet Omid Scobie can't say it. So even if he's making some valid points here, and I think that there are some valid things he's saying, it's very difficult to accept it because he's coming at it from such an extreme angle. All right, well, he says that Charles is just a villain, pure and simple. You can see that in the way that he was a father. So we've addressed the fact that he was a terrible husband to Diana, but now we need to talk about what a snake he is as a dad. He goes on to say that this brewing power struggle between the favored prince and the unpopular king is Shakespearean, a familial tug-of-war waged both on stage and off that still has the potential to unravel the monarchical tapestry. Scheming and backstabbing began long ago. Jealous of Harry's popularity with the media and William's preferred status in the firm, King Charles has been known to turn a blind eye while aides leak details about his sons to the press. Camilla, also guilty of the same practices, caused further damage to the family during her long-running campaign to rehabilitate her own image. A tactical masterstroke, a well-timed leak, can pave the way for a beneficial, back-scratching relationship with media confidants in exchange for favorable treatment, while also cutting down competition for the spotlight a rung or two. Long before the release of Spare, it was well known within the tight circle of royal correspondence that Charles eagerly piggybacked on reports of Prince Harry's teenage drug use by allowing the leak of personal details about his own son to construct a great dad narrative that many within the press gladly printed in return. Well, even Tom Bower will support the idea that Charles sometimes allowed the press to paint him as a great dad while Harry was going through these struggles. But I think that there's also the possibility that perhaps he was trying with his children, and he's just not very gregarious in the way he displays affection. But even as Harry tried to paint his dad as this bumbling fool who just botched every attempt at intimacy with his son, we were left, after reading Spare, with a greater impression of King Charles' love for his son, even as Harry worked to destroy that image. And you all recall, with me, our astonishment that Harry was so disdainful of the letters his dad used to write to him. So it would seem that Charles struggled to display his emotion verbally, and maybe even physically with hugs and, touch. But he wasn't sparing the words of affection when it came to the written word, which is where he's more comfortable. You can't be mad at somebody for not being able to display your brand of love when they are displaying something to you. If his father had always ignored him and never made time for him and never wrote him any letters and never hugged him and never talked to him, that would be one thing. But him always calling Harry my dear boy, him writing these notes to Harry, and him really looking to aid Harry in what seemed a continual struggle with his mental health. And I just don't understand how people can interpret Charles as uncaring. Even Diana said that he cared about his sons after she had gotten the divorce and after she was separated from him. Suddenly, when she no longer needed to be the favored parent, she had words of affirmation for his parenting, and she did not try to discourage people from believing that he was a good dad once it was all said and done. Now, she was definitely on a campaign against him when she wanted to get away from him, and it behooved her to describe him as a bad dad. But as soon as she was out, she had no reason to disparage him, and she didn't. But of course, that doesn't make it into this book. Okay. Once we've established the fact that Charles is the ultimate villain in this story, the Shakespearean tale, as Scobie would call it, we need to talk about the relationship between Harry and William. Scobie says that though they were remarkably close as they grew up, Harry's decision to, quote, defect to America, these are William's choice of words according to a source, not mine, says Scobie, the rift between them widened, and an already growing rift between the pair became established. Disappointed in Harry's life decisions and rooted in his ignited newfound dedication to the crown, William now considers his brother an outsider, especially since the release of Harry's memoir, which not only gave further details surrounding the Sussexes' decision to step back from their royal roles, but also William's part in it. The heir doesn't, quote, really need the spare any longer, one source admitted to me shortly after the Duke of Sussex left Britain in March of 2020. What a stupid paragraph. On so many levels. Let me break it down for you. Let's start out with the fact that he disdains William's choice of words in calling Harry's trip to America as defecting to America. Well, he did defect. He had a responsibility and he shunned it. That is what defecting is. There was a duty he was supposed to play out. He didn't do it. That's defecting. So that's William's choice of words, not mine. Yeah, well, William understands vocabulary. So, no shocker there. And then over here to saying that he is disappointed in Harry's life decisions and rooted in his ignited newfound dedication to the crown, William now considers his brother an outsider. His brother is an outsider by his own choices and by his own admission. He wanted to be outside the circle of the royal family, the institution, as they call it. If somebody chooses to be an outsider, then how can you say that William's over here considering his brother as an outsider? No, Harry made that decision and his brother is confirming that. Also, by saying to us that he's really disappointed in Harry's life decision, but also he has suddenly this new ignited dedication to the crown. Well, one would imagine he does. His grandmother has passed away, so he's one step closer to the crown. It would behoove him to learn the ropes. So why are we acting like this is really a disgusting character trait, that he actually is taking his future role seriously? And God help me, I hope so. It's like, of course he's going to take it more seriously. It's getting closer and closer. His dad's no spring chicken. Have we looked at his hands? What the heck? Okay? That guy's one step closer to the grave every day. I mean, aren't we all? But, I mean, his health seems to be precarious at best. And now we know also that he's struggled with cancer. So William better take it seriously, because he's up next real soon. But Scobie's not done hammering William yet. He writes, no longer useful as a helpful distraction or collateral damage, William had been long wanting to distance himself from his brother ever since Harry's marriage to Meghan, whom the then Duke of Cambridge took a disliking to from the start. Now firmly established within their own household, William and Kate, there's that Kate again, have become a committed, driven team focused on their roles in the family and in royal history. Harry's dramas are no longer of any concern to them. Or so they say. Okay, or so they say. Of course, Harry is no longer of any interest to them. I mean, okay, I would not even say that's true. I think that Harry and Meghan, I think they care about Harry. Probably not Meghan. But I do think they care about Harry. You would never get over the pain of losing your brother, who you had been really close to the wiles of a woman, knowing your brother just isn't with it enough to realize what he has come up against. I think that the disappointment that he would choose her and her lies over the relationship that you have had with him for years and years, and you two have weathered many a storm together, to see all that go up in smoke because Meghan wants to let you believe that there has been some kind of unconscious bias going on, that would be devastating. So I do think that William and Catherine still care about Harry. But do I think that they care to involve themselves in the drama anymore? No. Why would that behoove them? They have bigger fish to fry. And Scobie can try to throw shade at them all day long, acting like, look how they're so concerned about the monarchy and the crown. What's that about? Well, what that's about is they have work to do, so they better be about it. I mean, unlike Harry and Meghan, they really have things they need to do. Okay, they can't just be sitting around in Montecito checking their phones all day for their mentions. They really have duties and engagements and people who are relying on them. And they've got to use the finances that they have correctly. They can't just be squandering it on this, that, and the other designer dress. Okay, to continue on, Scobie wants to let you know that some might wonder why he's even writing about Harry and Meghan now that they have decidedly left the inner royal circle. So in a book about the monarchy, why even bring up Harry and Meghan? So he just wants to kind of dispel your concerns about that because, as he puts it, they actually are a very integral part of the story. He says their role in the bigger royal story remains an important as ever storyline. The issues raised by the couple, including allegations of bullying, misogyny, racism, or in Harry's description, unconscious bias. Okay, so Harry's such a great guy that he's not willing to use the R word. He's really fair and calls it unconscious bias. So Scobie wants to quote him on that. But the royal family's image manipulation alongside the institutional cruelty that Harry and Meghan experienced remain largely ignored and unexamined by the palace. And any promises made after their departure, including a focus on diversity within the royal households, have proven little more than the PR-friendly gloss over that it is. Not a great look for an institution whose monarch is sovereign to interracial Britain and the head of the predominantly non-white Commonwealth. Discrediting Harry and Meghan through negative press briefings, no matter how many times palace sources deny doing so, may have damaged Sussex's legacy to many. But for the members of the public, still horrified by the family's treatment of its first mixed-race royal, it remains a thorny issue. One thing I want to point out real quick as a side note is, isn't it interesting that they didn't even invite Omid Scobie to be part of the documentary? They were calling up all these old characters from their past, Ashley being one of them, the niece of Meghan, who she scorned and would not allow to the wedding, but when it was convenient for her, invited her back into her life. Yet, this member of the press corps, Omid Scobie, whose bread and butter is covering these two and creating more and more lies around this story, they didn't even invite him to be on their documentary. And he's saying all the same things everyone in that documentary was. Like, even they know that he is a sketchy character, that they shouldn't be seen involving themselves in too much. But they had all these other people speaking on their behalf. All these other no-names who they called up to say a little something on their behalf. Wouldn't it have been a good idea to have a member of the press saying, yeah, I witnessed myself all this stuff going on behind the scenes? Because he's literally saying everything that they've said. He is stating all the same issues that they are stating. He would have been a perfect mouthpiece in that documentary as a member of the press. But they know he's shady. They use him just like these two are using each other all over the place. Like, he wouldn't have anything to write about if it wasn't for them. And they need him to write positive things, but they don't want to get too close. Okay, back to the book. Beyond the family circle's damaging dramas, the institution of the monarchy is in increasingly desperate straits too. Supporting a cratered firm after the Queen's death is a tall order in and of itself. Doubly so when a growing percentage of the population feels that the monarchy is losing relevancy, with many now far more comfortable in voicing their views after Elizabeth II's passing. Recent years have seen an institution scrambling to justify its significance to younger generations who believe it no longer serves a strong enough purpose to justify its growing cost of the state. But then here he comes in with the dumbest thing he said for a minute now. He says that the desperation of the institution has taken on a Trumpian twist because he says that they lean on patriotism, even jingoism, to shore up its purpose. When in doubt, festoon the palace, unfurl the Union Jack, and enlist the tabloids. So they're falling apart. Nobody cares about them. So they took a leaf out of Trump's book and now they're just waving the flag. And that's supposed to get everybody on board. You guys, as a side note, not to get too political, but if there is a discrepancy between the two sides in any country, it is your loss to allow the other side to claim patriotism as their virtue. Patriotism is for everybody. It's not for one side. It's not for the other. So for people to sit back and be like, look at those Trumpian figures waving the flag. Look how they are leaning on patriotism. Why aren't you? Why are you letting that other side have the flag? It's your flag too. Don't give it up. You be as patriotic as you want to be. It isn't nationalism or jingoism, as he calls it. Patriotism is not the virtue or the right of a conservative set of politicians. It is the right of every single person in that country. The conservative and the liberal should love the flag just as equally. It should be the uniting factor, and it is your loss if you let the other side have it. All right, rant over. According to Scobie, there's just hardly any ability for the royal family to stand on its 2 feet after Queen Elizabeth has passed because, as he puts it, the rot has set in and it's eating away at the monarchy's undergirding. Without Queen Elizabeth II, who is there to offer a counterpoint, to stop the rot from spreading? Like Dorian's portrait in the attic, the ruinous truth is starting to show. Not a Dorian Gray reference. Oh my gosh, she's so smart, you guys. Okay, well, finally, at this point, he decides to let us know who he even is. I mean, you're reading this and you're thinking, who is this Joker? What authority does he have to tell us anything? So finally, at this late date, he decides to give us a little bit of backstory as to who he is. You guys, it's not helping his cause. He says that he's been following every important step of the royal story since William and Kate's engagement captured the hearts and the excitement of a global audience in 2010. But he never expected to be one day in the middle of it all. Working as the European bureau chief for Jan Wenner's Us Weekly magazine, which he wants to let you know at the time was one of America's most read publications. He says, my entrance into the royal press ranks was bright-eyed and I cut my teeth covering the gamut of royal events and news stories, engagements, weddings, births, and many wet Wednesdays in small rural towns for community center openings and plaque unveilings. So you guys, he wrote for Us Weekly, so now he's an authority. He says, luckily for me, my work separated me from some of the less savory British media outlets that staff and family members had grown to quietly despise. How so? I'm not sure. The arrival of Meghan in 2016 saw my 2 new beats, entertainment and the royals, collide, and less than a year later, I made the decision to focus on the royal family full-time. Owing to a unique pool of sources and a refusal to follow the crowd, I quickly became a trusted confidant for many in and around the younger family. A true insider. So don't ever doubt my sources, you guys, because I'm a true insider. But that all changed in late 2020 after the publication of my first book, Finding Freedom, about Harry and Meghan's whirlwind journey in and out of the House of Windsor. It blew the lid off the Sussex saga, finally revealing the backroom mechanisms and the family betrayals that eventually forced the royal couple out of the firm. But it also put me on the receiving end of several of the same toxic practices that pushed the couple to their breaking point. You ended up in a place journalism rarely finds themselves, in the middle of a family war, and you were on the wrong side, a senior aide to the late Queen opinioned to me as I began writing this book. Okay. Well, but you didn't really blow the lid off of it. I mean, to say that the book Finding Freedom blew the lid off of anything, blew the lid off his credibility is the only thing it can have done. Because I don't think anybody looked at that book as hard-hitting journalism. That was a book of propaganda, much like this is a book of propaganda. You're not revealing anything to us, man. You're just over there churning out these sad little stories with your sorry little twist because you are part of a class of people that finds value in oppression. And you'll go and sniff it out wherever you can and go sit in it so that you can be valued too. Son, you could be valued for real things. There are real virtues to attain. Oppression is not one of them. And you're far too old, by the way. You're 42 years old, I believe. That is too old to be taking on the virtue of this younger generation who has had no difficulties in their life and who has decided that oppression is the best they can do as far as a personality trait. So they identify with oppression as though it is the very core of their being. And you are too old to continue on like that. But this is why you have found yourself being the mouthpiece for their story, because you think that there's value in oppression when there isn't. Well, he goes on to say that he's still in the mix, but Let's just say I'm no longer the journalist who some in the family or the more royalist-leaning correspondents are thrilled to see at engagements. Having moved away from playing the palace game of give and take to maintain access, I am now a perceived source of trouble for the institution. Why? Because I know and share too much. For 4 years, some of the most damaging in Windsor history, I witnessed the full scope of the deceptions, malice, and offensive posturing of an unstable family business and an institution in decline. I saw just how far they would go to save their own skin, the deep corrosion at the heart of the royal establishment, and I've witnessed the human damage done because of it. Ugh, he has had a front row seat to World War III, you guys, and he just wanted to tell you about it, and he's been punished for it. But all that hangs in the balance now. I fear that by continuing to ignore the ongoing constitutional corruption in the palace's inner sanctum and enabling a cabal of courtiers and the British media to call the shots, as well as quietly support those who have brought shame and humiliation to the crown, the royal institution is risking untold damage to the Queen's legacy. He just cares about the Queen, you guys. It's the Queen he loves so much. Of course, she was the head of an institution that is full of dry rot and racism, but in the end, she was a great lady. And he cares about her name and her legacy. That is just fundamentally doesn't make sense. If you think she was so great, then how can you think that she was great if she was the head of an institution that you think was full of embedded racism and misogyny? She can't be great if she's the head of something terrible. This entire prologue and then the first chapter defeats his entire argument. She cannot be great if she is the champion and head of something that he would deem to be terrible. You can't have your cake and eat it too. The problem is that he doesn't have a backbone. If he dislikes the monarchy and the institution of the crown, then he too has to dislike Queen Elizabeth. But nobody dislikes Queen Elizabeth. So he can't come out the gate and be like, yeah, I thought she was a terrible old lady. Because she wasn't, and that's an agreed upon decision. Nobody disliked her. So there's just no way for him to write this book unless he takes the opinion that she too was corrupt. But if he does that, then it's going to completely silence him. But to say otherwise silences the rest of his argument that the institution is a terrible organization. Because it was so terrible, how could it have put at the helm this wonderful woman? So he doesn't. This prologue is just, it's debunking the entire book. But King Charles and Prince William have already displayed signs that they are allowing selfish agendas, a culture of cover-ups and PR trickery and family discord to take over the House of Windsor. It is an outcome the royal family can avoid, but only if there is change. I just want to remind him that discord in the royal family is hardly new to this strain of the family, so they seem to have managed thus far. I think it's going to be okay. Then he wants to go on to let you guys know that when you're reading Endgame, you might think, oh, I've already heard all of this already. But he just wants to let you know that he's just really putting it all together in one place for you. He's doing you a favor is what he's doing, even though all of this is stuff you already know. He says some of what you read in Endgame may already be known to those in the self-regulated pack of journalists who, just like the White House press pool, shout at the family on their various endeavors. But that doesn't mean you'll hear it from them. Though one can usually get away with the occasional rock of the boat, you need to waltz the palace's dance if you want to maintain access to those off-record briefings and invites to private engagements. Me? Let's just say it's not the path I continue to follow. Well, how then do we know that your sources are worthy? You just finished telling us not but one page ago that you used to have the inside scoop and now you don't because everyone's sorry to see you coming. And now you're trying to tell us that the things in the pages of Endgame are things that all the inner circle knows, but you just finished telling us the inner circle won't talk to you anymore. But where are your sources from? He says the information shared over the pages ahead is sourced from over a decade of personal reporting files, as well as conversations and interviews with the many who have played a part in seminal moments, be they friends or professional acquaintances of the royals and those working for the monarchy, palisades and courtiers past and present, insiders from the world of politics and media, and, as you'll see, occasionally a royal family member themselves. Which one? Harry? I mean, nobody's going to talk to you, Omid. But here's the real kicker, you guys. Listen to this last line. Hard hitting is what it is. Parts of this book will burn my bridges for good. But to tell the full story, there's no holding back. Not anymore. We're in the end game. So what do you think of that? If he thinks that this book is really going to put the royal family out to pasture, he has another thing coming. How could he be so self-aggrandizing as to think that that load of tripe has anything to do with reality? That anybody is going to be panicking because of this book is so ridiculous that it makes me concerned for his mental health. How could he be such a narcissist that he thinks that his opinion, as pithy and uninteresting and as biased as it is, would do anything to convince anyone of anything? All right, well, that's the end of that chapter. I had hoped that we could get into chapter 1 today, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'll just try to get that out tomorrow, because this prologue was there was just too much to cover. And also we just had to talk about who he was even as a person, because we need to bear that in mind this entire time. This is not a person that we can trust on any level. And the interview that I talked about at the beginning of this, that I saw of him, not great. And the fact that this entire prologue is so shoddy and one-sided. So we just need to bear in mind who we're dealing with, okay? And I needed to establish that before we even got into it. So that was that. I hope you guys will stick with me for the remainder of this book. But you guys, I want to get this done with fairly soon. I mean, I'm going to read every chapter, don't worry. But there's a new book out about the Kennedys. It's called Ask Not. I cannot wait. I have it pre-ordered. We are reading that, okay? I don't care if it's not about Harry and Meghan. I have got to read this book. It is scandalous. Scandalous, I tell you guys. It is going to break open stories that you thought you knew. I cannot wait. I saw Megyn Kelly interviewing the author the other day, and that interview alone, like, my mind was blown over and over and over. And they were like, we're just barely scratching the surface of what's in this book. Like, barely scratching the surface. I am astounded at what you've said in the last 40 minutes, telling me things I never even knew, even kind of. We're definitely going to be reading that book. So we're going to be reading this Omid Scobie thing because, fun trash. When the Kennedy book comes out, I really want to start reading that to you as well. And then, of course, on Sundays, we're going to continue with the Mountbatten book. I've decided to just have that be our Sunday special because not as many of you are enjoying that book. And I think that it would be better for me to do work during the week that sort of supports the channel. And then Sunday gets to be our fun Sunday special with the Mountbattens, our historical book that is a real credit to Andrew Lowney, who did an amazing amount of research for that book, and it's incredible. And as I've said many times, even if you think that it's not something you would enjoy, think again, because it's blowing my socks off. It's so crazy. All right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll continue on with Omid Scobie throughout the rest of the week. Bye.